The Intergalactic Research and Exchange Station, or IRES as most residents called it, hung in the neutral space between three major galactic territories. Its curved, crystalline structures reflected the light of the nearby star in prismatic bursts, creating an ever-shifting kaleidoscope of colors across its surface. Inside, the station hummed with activity as beings from over 30 different worlds moved through its corridors, each adapted to their own section of the environmental controls. Elias Vance stood in his newly assigned medical bay, organizing supplies with methodical precision. At 43 Earth years, he had the weathered look of someone who had seen more than his fair share of emergencies. Deep lines etched around his eyes spoke of years squinting under harsh lights at injuries, both mundane and horrific. His dark hair was peppered with gray at the temples, and his hands, though steady and precise, bore the small scars of a career spent in field medicine rather than the sterile environments of core world hospitals. Final inspection complete, Medical Officer Vance announced the station's AI in its neutral, pleasant tone. Environmental controls calibrated to Earth standard with adjustments for visiting species in emergency situations. Medical database integrated with your personal archives. Thanks, RES, Elias replied, sliding a case of basic first aid supplies into a cabinet. And the orientation schedule for the new research cohort. Scheduled for 0900 station time tomorrow. 27 students representing 12 species. Full biological profiles have been uploaded to your terminal. Elias nodded, moving to the terminal to scan through the information. His expression remained neutral, but internally he felt a familiar weight settling in his chest. He'd been the sole human medical officer on remote stations before, but never for such a diverse group. He had the training, certainly. Xenomedicine had been a requirement since humans had joined the Galactic Cooperative, but theory and practice were worlds apart. The roster showed a particularly high number of crystalline xylars, silicon-based entities whose physiology was so foreign to carbon-based life that even the most basic medical interventions required specialized knowledge. There were also several Vreen, a gaseous species that maintained cohesion through complex electromagnetic fields, a handful of Taurians, massive arthropod-like beings with exoskeletons and multiple specialized limbs, and various other species with their own unique requirements. Just keep them in one piece, Vance, he muttered to himself, shutting down the terminal. That's all they're asking. But as he continued organizing his supplies, mostly Earth-standard equipment with a few specialized tools for the more common non-human physiologies, he couldn't help wondering if he was adequately prepared. The Galactic Health Organization had assured him that each species would have their own specialized medical equipment and at least basic knowledge of their own first aid. His role was primarily to coordinate care, provide emergency services when specialized help wasn't available, and maintain the station's medical facilities. Simple enough in theory. But Elias had been a field medic long enough to know that theory rarely survived first contact with reality. The next morning, Elias stood before the assembled group of researchers and students in the station's main auditorium. They were an impressive sight, the crystalline xylars refracting light in complex patterns, the Vreen floating in their containment fields, their gaseous forms shifting in hues of purple and blue, the towering Taurians clicking their mandibles in what Elias had learned was a sign of attentiveness. "Welcome to IRES," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the room. "I'm Elias Vance, your station medical officer. Before we begin your scientific orientation, I'd like to cover some basic safety protocols." He proceeded through a standard briefing, emergency evacuation procedures, environmental control overrides, basic first aid stations located throughout the facility. Most of the students seemed attentive, though he noticed a few of the xylars vibrating in what might have been impatience. "Any questions before we move on to your research assignments?" Elias asked, concluding his presentation. A xylar near the front raised what appeared to be an appendage, a crystalline structure that extended from its main body. "Medical Officer Vance, our records indicate that this station is equipped with only basic restorative technologies. Is this accurate?" Elias nodded. IRES is primarily a research station, not a medical facility. We have standard emergency equipment and stabilization capabilities, but for specialized treatment, severe cases would need evacuation to the nearest medical hub. A wave of vibrations passed through the Xylar contingent. This is concerning. Our physiology requires immediate nanorestructuring for even minor fractures. Delay could result in permanent lattice degradation. I understand your concern, Elias replied calmly. Your cultural liaison provided us with emergency protocols for Xylar physiology, and we have basic nanorestructuring equipment on hand. For serious cases, we have rapid evacuation protocols to the Xylar medical facility in the Cygnus sector. This seemed to mollify the Xylar somewhat, though the crystalline beings continued to vibrate at a frequency that Elias's training suggested indicated anxiety. After the orientation, the new arrivals were divided into research teams for their first sample collection expedition to a nearby moon. Elias accompanied one of the teams, a mixed group that included 3 Xylars, 2 Vreen, a Taurian named Kthar, and a plantoid Xylophian who introduced herself as Xyla. The moon's surface was rocky but not particularly treacherous, a barren landscape of gray stone and dust with gravity at about 0.8 Earth standard. Each team was tasked with collecting mineral samples that might contain traces of an unusual radiation signature detected by orbital scans. Elias watched as the researchers worked, keeping a careful eye for any signs of environmental stress. The Vreen had the easiest time, their gaseous forms flowing over the terrain with simple containment units to collect samples. The Xylars moved more carefully, their crystalline forms glinting in the light of the distant sun. It happened quickly. One of the Xylars, a younger student named Six, was extending what Elias had learned was a sensory appendage toward a particularly interesting rock formation when a small tremor shook the ground. Not dangerous, barely perceptible to Elias, but enough to send a loose rock tumbling down the slight incline. It struck Six's extended appendage with what seemed to Elias like minimal force. The reaction was immediate and alarming. Six emitted a high-pitched sound that Elias's translator couldn't interpret, but that clearly indicated distress. The crystalline being's entire form began vibrating violently, and a small but visible crack had appeared where the rock had made contact. The other Xylars rushed to their companion, their own forms vibrating in what Elias's training identified as extreme alarm. Structural breach, one of them cried out, the translator rendering their crystalline vibrations into panicked words. Critical lattice damage. We need emergency phase stabilization immediately. Elias hurried over, medical kit in hand, trying to assess the situation through the throng of agitated crystalline beings surrounding their injured colleague. Please give me space to examine the patient, he said firmly but calmly, using the authoritative tone he developed over years of emergency medicine. The Xylars reluctantly parted, though they continued to emit distressed frequencies. Six lay on the ground, the crystalline form still intact save for the small crack, which was perhaps 3 centimeters long and appeared quite shallow to Elias's eye. Elias ran a quick scan with his medical tricorder, comparing the readings to the Xylar biological profiles he'd studied. The crack was indeed superficial, affecting only the outermost layer of Six's crystalline matrix. There was no sign of the lattice degradation the other Xylars seemed so concerned about. Six, Elias addressed the student directly. Can you still maintain cohesion? Why, yes, came the shaky reply, but the structural integrity is compromised. I can feel the pattern destabilizing. Without immediate nanoreconstruction, the fracture will propagate through my entire matrix. One of the other Xylars thrust forward what looked like a complex device composed of floating metallic components. We must apply a phase stabilization field immediately, followed by nanolattice reconstruction. Elias held up a hand. Wait, my scans show this is a superficial fracture. There's no evidence of deep lattice disruption. He reached into his kit and pulled out a small canister. This is a cooling gel with mineral stabilizers. It will prevent any further propagation while your natural healing processes engage. Natural healing processes? The word seemed almost foreign to the Xyler who had offered the device. Our kind does not naturally heal. Any structural breach must be immediately repaired with proper technology, or will inevitably lead to complete failure. Elias remained calm. According to the xenobiological profiles, Xyler crystalline matrices do have self-healing capabilities for minor fractures. It's slower than technological intervention, but often results in stronger reintegration. He turned to 6. May I apply the gel? It will feel cold, but it should provide immediate relief from any discomfort. 6 hesitated, vibrating uncertainty, but then extended the injured appendage. I will trust your medical judgment. Carefully, Elias applied the cooling gel to the small crack. 6 immediately emitted a soft chime that the translator didn't catch. The sensation is unexpected, 6 said. There is numbness, but also a cessation of the destabilizing resonance. Good, Elias nodded. The gel is working as intended. It's forming temporary molecular bonds across the fracture and stabilizing the affected area. Now, I want you to rest this appendage. Don't use it for the remainder of the expedition. When we return to the station, I'll apply a mineral patch that will further support the healing process. But one of the other Xylars began. I understand your concern, Elias said firmly, but I've treated fractures like this before in crystalline species. Trust me when I say that sometimes the simplest solution is the best one. Just ice it and you'll be fine. The phrase, translated into the closest Xyler conceptual equivalent, seemed to shock the crystalline beings in a momentary silence. Ice it? Repeated one of them, the translator rendering the tone as incredulous. You suggest applying frozen water to a compromised silicoid matrix as a medical treatment? Elias realized the translation issue. It's a human expression. I meant the cooling gel, which serve a similar function to how we use ice for certain injuries. The point is, this injury isn't as severe as it appears. With proper care and rest, 6 will heal completely. The Xylars exchanged what Elias interpreted as skeptical vibrations, but they didn't argue further. 6 seemed somewhat reassured, the violent vibrations having subsided to a gentler frequency. The expedition continued, though 6 remained near Elias, resting the injured appendage as directed. By the time they returned to the station, Elias noted with satisfaction that the crack already showed signs of stabilization, with the edges beginning to reintegrate. In the medical bay, Elias applied the promised mineral patch, a specialized compound designed to provide the necessary elements for Xyler crystal regeneration. There, he said, securing the patch with a light bandage. Leave this on for at least 12 hours. By tomorrow, you should be fully functional again. 6 produced a sound that might have been agreement. But as soon as the young Xyler left the medical bay, Elias overheard an unmistakable burst of concerned vibrations from the waiting companions. Word spread quickly through the station. By the next day, Elias noticed a distinct change in how the non-human residents regarded him. The Xylars particularly seemed to avoid the medical bay entirely, despite, or perhaps because of, the fact that 6's injury was indeed healing exactly as Elias had predicted. In the station's common area, Elias overheard fragments of conversations that stopped abruptly when he entered. Phrases like primitive methodology and dangerously simplistic approach reached his ears before beings hurriedly changed subjects. Thar, the Taurian researcher who had been on the expedition, approached Elias's table during the midday meal. May I join you, Medical Officer Vance? The massive arthropoid asked, mandibles clicking gently. Of course, Elias replied, gesturing to the seat across from him with his fork. And please call me Elias. Thar carefully folded his multiple limbs to accommodate the human design seating. I wish to inquire about your treatment of 6 yesterday. The Xylars are concerned. Elias set down his fork. I'm aware, but 6 is healing well. I checked the injury this morning, and the crystalline reintegration is proceeding perfectly. Yes, this is true, Thar admitted, his compound eyes shifting in what Elias had learned was a sign of thoughtfulness. But many are questioning your methodology. The The Xylars particularly believe that your refusal to use their nano-reconstruction technology put Six at unnecessary risk. Elias sighed. I understand their perspective, but from my medical assessment, the injury was minor, and natural healing was not only sufficient but preferable. Excessive technological intervention can sometimes interfere with natural processes. This concept of natural healing is foreign to many species here, Kthar said carefully. For beings like the Xylars, any structural compromise is seen as catastrophic without immediate technological intervention. Cultural differences in medical philosophy, Elias nodded. I've encountered this before. It usually takes time for... An alarm interrupted their conversation. Not the station-wide emergency signal, but the personal alert on Elias's medical communicator. He checked the device quickly. Medical emergency in Lab 7, he said, standing immediately. Excuse me. Elias arrived at Lab 7 to find a young Vreen researcher in obvious distress. The gaseous being's normally cohesive purple form was pulsating erratically, with occasional wisps escaping the electromagnetic containment field that helped maintain their humanoid shape. A senior Vreen researcher hovered nearby, along with several other concerned staff members from various species. The senior Vreen was manipulating a complex device that appeared to be attempting to stabilize the younger one's containment field. What happened? Elias asked, quickly assessing the situation. Field destabilization, the senior Vreen explained, voice rendered high and urgent by the translator. N6 was working with the spectral analyzer when they experienced a partial phase shift. Their coherence is dropping rapidly. We need an emergency field resonator. Elias scanned the young Vreen with his medical tricorder. The readings confirmed some disruption to their electromagnetic field, but nothing that appeared life-threatening according to the Vreen biological profile in his database. What symptoms are you experiencing? N6, he asked the distressed, gaseous being directly. Discomfort, came the translated reply. Difficulty maintaining cohesion. A slight perceptual distortion. Elias nodded, consulting his scanner again. I'm detecting a minor electromagnetic field variance, but your core cohesion matrix is stable. This appears to be something similar to what humans might call a muscle spasm, temporary and not dangerous. Not dangerous? The senior Vreen ejected a puff of gas that the translator didn't catch, but Elias interpreted as indignation. Field destabilization can lead to complete dissipation if not immediately corrected with proper technology. Elias held up a hand calmingly. For a major field disruption, yes. But what N6 is experiencing is minor. The readings show it's already beginning to self-correct. He turned to the patient. N6, I recommend you move to a low-stimulus environment and engage your rest state cycle for at least 4 hours. The field will stabilize on its own. But the senior Vreen began. I understand your concern, Elias said firmly. But sometimes less intervention is better. The body, even a gaseous one, has remarkable self-healing capabilities. Rest and time will resolve this more effectively than technology in this case. The senior Vreen emitted what Elias's translator rendered as a skeptical huff, but after some discussion, during which N6's condition did indeed begin to visibly improve, they reluctantly agreed to Elias's treatment plan. As they left, Elias overheard the senior Vreen telling another researcher, primitive medicine. They still believe in resting as treatment. Next, he'll be suggesting we try leeches. Similar incidents occurred over the next few days. A Taurian researcher suffered a minor joint dislocation during an exercise session in the high-gravity gym. Instead of the complex exoskeletal recalibration their companions insisted was necessary, Elias gently manipulated the joint back into place, applied a simple brace, and recommended rest. A Xylopian botanist developed a rash-like discoloration on their leafy epidermis after handling a new specimen. Rather than the elaborate biosynthetic resequencing their colleagues proposed, Elias applied a simple anti-inflammatory balm and suggested avoiding the irritant. In each case, Elias's simple treatments proved effective, Yet the skepticism from the non-human residents seemed to grow rather than diminish. He heard the whispers as he walked the corridors. Dangerously simplistic, refuses proper medical technology, barbaric minimalism. Only a few seemed curious rather than critical. Thar continued to engage Elias in thoughtful conversations about comparative medicine. And Zyla, the Xylofian whose rash had indeed cleared up within hours of Elias's treatment, began to stop by the medical bay regularly, ostensibly to have her recovery monitored, but clearly also interested in learning more about human medical philosophy. "I find it fascinating," she told Elias one afternoon, her voice a melodic rustle translated into comprehensible speech. "Your approach contradicts much of what is taught in galactic medical academies, yet I cannot argue with the results." Elias smiled as he scanned her now healthy epidermis. Human medicine has evolved over thousands of years, much of it through trial and error. We learned that sometimes the body knows best how to heal itself, and our job is just to support that process rather than override it. But surely there are times when technological intervention is necessary. Zyla asked, her leaf-like appendages shifting in what Elias had learned was a sign of genuine curiosity. "Absolutely," Elias nodded. "For serious injuries or illnesses, we use every technological advantage available. But we've also learned that overtreatment can sometimes do more harm than good. There's a balance." "Balance," Zyla repeated thoughtfully. "This concept appears often in human philosophy, I've noticed." Their conversation was interrupted by the station-wide emergency alarm. 3 sharp blasts followed by the AI's calm voice. "Emergency protocol activated. Structural damage detected in Research Wing B. All medical personnel report immediately." This is not a drill. Elias was moving before the announcement finished, grabbing his emergency medical kit and rushing toward the research wing. As he ran, the station's AI provided updates directly to his communicator. "Pressure vessel rupture in Laboratory B7. Multiple casualties reported. Environmental containment holding, but at risk. Emergency response teams en route." When Elias arrived at the scene, chaos reigned. The laboratory's reinforced doors had been emergency sealed, but a viewport showed the destruction inside. Something, Elias would later learn, it was an experimental energy containment system, had catastrophically failed, resulting in an explosion that had torn through half the lab. Emergency protocols had activated, sealing the breach to prevent depressurization of the entire wing, but not before several researchers had been injured by the blast and flying debris. The emergency response team was working to secure the area and restore full environmental stability before the sealed doors could be safely opened. Elias joined the other emergency personnel gathering outside, preparing to receive the injured. "Status report," he demanded of the security officer coordinating the response. 7 researchers were in the lab at the time of the explosion, the officer replied, a humanoid being from a species Elias wasn't familiar with. Initial assessment suggests 3 with critical injuries, 2 moderate, 2 minor. Mix of species, 2 Xylars, a Vreen, 2 Taurians including Thar, a Xylofian, and a Meridian. Elias nodded grimly, mentally reviewing the different physiological needs of each species. Time to extraction. Environmental stabilization in progress. Estimate 3 minutes until safe entry. Those 3 minutes felt like hours as Elias prepared his equipment and coordinated with the other medical responders, mostly automated units and a couple of trained non-human medical technicians. He could hear cries and calls for help from inside, translated into multiple languages by the emergency systems. When the doors finally slid open, revealing the devastation inside, Elias moved in immediately, triaging with practiced efficiency. The scene was worse than he'd feared. The laboratory was in ruins, with equipment shattered and strewn across the floor. The air was filled with a haze of particles, some of which Elias realized with concern were likely fragments of the injured Vreen, whose gaseous form had partially dispersed in the explosion. Thar lay near would have been the center of the blast. One of his limbs clearly broken, the exoskeleton cracked and leaking hemolymph. Nearby, a Xyla researcher had been partially shattered, crystalline fragments scattered around their still intact core. Xyla was slumped against a wall. Her normally vibrant green coloration faded to a sickly yellow, with several leaves torn or burned. The other victims were in various states of injury. The second Xyler had multiple fractures running through their crystalline form. The second Taurian appeared to have suffered concussive damage to their sensory organs. The Meridian, a liquid-state being, was struggling to maintain cohesion after what looked like contamination from laboratory chemicals. The scene was made more chaotic by the various technological devices that had automatically deployed or been activated by the panicked researchers. Field stabilizers for the Vreen, nanoreconstructors hovering uselessly around the shattered Xyler, various medical drones attempting to scan and treat injuries without proper coordination. Everyone stop! Elias's voice cut through the chaos. Deactivate all automated medical systems unless they're providing life support. We need to coordinate our response. To his surprise, the authority in his voice had an immediate effect. The researchers still capable of movement complied, shutting down the various competing systems. First, stabilize the critical cases, Elias directed, moving to Kthar first. The Taurian's injury was severe but straightforward, a clean break in one of his secondary limbs and significant blood loss. Elias quickly applied a hemostatic agent and a temporary exoskeletal brace. Hold still, he told Kthar, whose compound eyes were dulled with pain. This will stop the bleeding and stabilize the fracture until we can get you to surgery. Kthar clicked weakly in acknowledgement. Elias moved next to the severely damaged Xyler. Here, the situation was more complex. The being's core matrix was intact, but a significant portion of their outer structure had been shattered. One of the medical technicians, a silicon-based being with some knowledge of Xyler physiology, approached with a complex device. We should initiate emergency matrix reconstruction immediately. Elias shook his head. Not yet. First, we need to ensure there are no microfractures in the core. Matrix. He ran his scanner over the injured Xyler, studying the readings carefully. Good. Core integrity holding. Now, collect the larger crystalline fragments and place them near the matrix. The Xyler can reintegrate them once we've stabilized the structural integrity. The technician seemed skeptical but complied. Elias applied a specialized bonding agent to the Xyler's core matrix, then carefully positioned the larger fragments where they could be reabsorbed. This will hold until we can get you to proper facilities, he told the injured Xyler, who vibrated weakly in response. He moved methodically through the other injuries, applying emergency containment fields to help the Vreen recoalesce their dispersed form, treating Xyla with a rapid hydration solution and photosynthetic enhancers, neutralizing the chemical contamination affecting the Meridian, and so on. Throughout it all, Elias worked with calm efficiency, using the most appropriate intervention for each case, sometimes high-tech when necessary, sometimes surprisingly basic when that was more effective. He coordinated the other responders, delegating tasks according to their abilities and the needs of each patient. As they stabilized the last of the injured and began evacuating them to the medical bay, Elias noticed Kthar watching him with an intensity that transcended the Taurian's pain. Something wrong? Elias asked as he checked the Taurian's vital signs once more before transport. No, Kthar replied, mandibles clicking softly. Something illuminating. I understand now what you meant about balance. In the medical bay, the real work began. For the next several hours, Elias and the medical team worked tirelessly to treat the injured researchers. The most serious cases required specialized care. The severely damaged Xyler was placed in a crystal regeneration chamber. The Vreen in an enhanced containment field with molecular reintegration support. Kthar in surgical suspension for proper setting of his fractured limb. But through it all, Elias maintained his approach of minimal necessary intervention, where the body's natural healing processes could be supported rather than supplanted. That was his preference. Where technology was truly needed, he used it without hesitation. By the time the crisis had passed, exhaustion weighed heavily on Elias. He sat in his office, reviewing the medical reports and treatment plans for each patient, when a soft chiming sound indicated a visitor. "Enter," he called, looking up to see Zyla, her coloration already improving though still paler than normal. "I hope I'm not disturbing you, Medical Officer Vance," she said, leaf appendages rustling softly. "Not at all. And please, it's Elias." He gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "How are you feeling?" "Much improved, thanks to your treatment." She settled into the chair, adapting her plant-like form to the furniture with practiced ease. The photosynthetic enhancers were remarkably effective. Our own medical protocols would have required a full chloroplast transfusion. Elias smiled tiredly. "Sometimes less is more. Your physiology is remarkably resilient. It just needed the right support to heal itself." "That is why I've come," Zyla said, leaning forward slightly. "Many of us have been reconsidering our view of your medical approach. What we witnessed today was not the primitive methodology we had assumed, but something more nuanced." "I understand the skepticism," Elias replied. "Different cultures develop different medical philosophies based on their unique challenges and histories. Humans learned through centuries of sometimes painful trial and error that healing is a partnership between medical intervention and the body's own processes. Thar wishes to speak with you as well. When he is recovered," Zyla continued. "He believes there is much our medical traditions could learn from each other. And not just Taurians. Many of the researchers who witnessed your work today are discussing it now." Over the next few weeks, as the injured researchers recovered, a subtle but significant shift occurred on the station. The medical bay, once avoided by many non-human residents, became a place of curious visitation and genuine exchange. Thar, his limb healing well in the simple but effective brace Elias had designed, began spending time observing Elias's daily work. The Taurian's background in biochemistry made him particularly interested in the principles behind human pharmacology. "The concept of minimum effective dose is fascinating," Thar remarked one day as he watched Elias prepare a mild analgesic for a human colleague with a headache. Taurian medicine generally subscribes to maximum intervention, overwhelming the problem with technological superiority. Elias nodded as he measured the medication carefully. Both approaches have their place. For acute, life-threatening conditions, aggressive intervention can be necessary. But for many conditions, supporting the body's natural processes with just enough help is more effective and has fewer side effects. 6. The young Zyler, whose minor injury had started it all, became something of an unexpected advocate for Elias's approach. The crystalline being's appendage had healed completely, with the reintegrated area actually stronger than before due to the natural healing process. "The experience has caused me to reevaluate many of our medical assumptions," Six told Elias during a checkup. "Our cultural fear of structural compromise has led to over-reliance on technological solutions, perhaps to our detriment." Even the Vreen, initially among the most skeptical, began to incorporate some of Elias's principles into their care protocols. In Six, whose field spasm had indeed resolved with simple rest, now assisted occasionally in the medical bay, particularly interested in learning about human diagnostic approaches. "Your method of differential diagnosis, considering multiple possibilities and eliminating them systematically, is more sophisticated than I initially recognized," N6 admitted, their gaseous form shifting in patterns that Elias had learned indicated thoughtful consideration. Elias, for his part, was equally engaged in learning from his non-human colleagues. He studied the principles behind Zyler crystal regeneration, Vreen field coherence, Taurian exoskeletal maintenance, and Xylophian photosynthetic optimization. Where appropriate, he incorporated elements of these approaches into his treatment protocols. 3 months after the laboratory accident, the station administration organized a symposium on integrative xenomedicine at the suggestion of Kthar and Zyla, with Elias invited as the keynote speaker. The auditorium was filled beyond capacity, with researchers from all species represented on the station in attendance. Many had experienced Elias's care directly or observed its effects, and curiosity had replaced skepticism. Elias, never particularly comfortable with public speaking, nevertheless approached the podium with the same calm confidence he brought to his medical practice. "Thank you all for coming," he began. When I arrived at this station, I expected to provide basic medical care and emergency services. What I didn't expect was to become part of one of the most interesting exchanges of medical philosophy I've ever experienced. He proceeded to outline the core principles that guided his approach: the balance between intervention and natural healing, the importance of understanding each species' unique regenerative capabilities, the value of simple solutions for simple problems, and the judicious use of technology when truly needed. Human medicine evolved in resource-constrained environments, he explained. For much of our history, we didn't have the luxury of advanced technology, so we learned to work with the body rather than trying to override it. This led to an appreciation for the remarkable self-healing capabilities that most living organisms possess, regardless of their biochemical basis. As he spoke, he could see the attentiveness in his audience, the xylars vibrating at frequencies indicating deep focus, the vreen shifting in thoughtful patterns, the Taurians clicking their mandibles in what he now recognized as agreement. This doesn't mean rejection of technology, Elias continued. The advanced medical technologies each of your species has developed are remarkable achievements that save lives. The key is knowing when to deploy them and when to step back and let nature take its course. After the symposium, a small reception was held in the station's common area. Elias found himself at a table with Kthar, Xyla, Six, and In6, a group that had, somewhat to his surprise, become something like friends over the past months. To integration, Kthar proposed a toast, raising a container of Taurian nutritional fluid with one of his uninjured appendages. To balance, added Xyla, lifting her cup of photosynthetic supplement. To understanding different perspectives, Six chimed, the crystalline beings formed glinting as they raised a vial of mineral solution. To unexpected wisdom, In6 contributed, their gaseous form swirling in an approximation of the toasting gesture. Elias smiled, raising his coffee cup, and to the universal truth that sometimes, just sometimes, all you need to do is ice it and you'll be fine. The gathered beings laughed, each in their own way, and Elias felt a sense of satisfaction deeper than any he'd experienced in his medical career. He had come to the station to provide care, but in the process, he had built bridges of understanding that transcended the vast physiological differences between species. As the evening continued with discussion and camaraderie, Elias reflected that this might be the most important treatment he had ever administered, not to individual patients, but to the collective understanding of what truly meant to heal.